and welcome to this week's book club episode of Star Wars Catalyst by James Luceno. If you're not familiar with the series, basically we look through a Star Wars book, a couple of chapters at a time, and break down the bigger themes and values and things that are going on. This week we are discussing chapters 14 and 15, the first of part 2 in this novel. If you check the description below, you can see this book from the beginning or our other books in the series if you want to catch up, or otherwise you're more welcome to just start following along. So as I said, we're starting part 2 today. Part 2 is titled Pursuit of Peace. So this is our look at life in the Empire after the Clone Wars and kind of that transitional period into what we get to know as the Empire, as parts of the Republic kind of get swept away, as it were. So we're going to look at these chapters in the context of Pursuit of Peace, but of course it's the Pursuit of Peace in the Imperial understanding, and we're going to discuss the chapters by their title as well. So we have congruence. So congruence is things kind of growing together, as it were, things coming together. So we have life in the Empire. Tarkin and Krennic are peacocking. This chapter was particularly funny to me. Krennic arriving, looking over the ship, and just giving Tarkin a hard time. At one point, them even, circling each other while they talk, trying to be, whose ship is bigger.
And I see your Schwartz is as big as mine.
Who has the grander space. The way these two talk to each other is just interesting to me, because on the one hand, Tarkin likes to play himself off as being so far beyond Krennic's standing, being that far superior, which is funny to me because if Tarkin was really that much superior, he wouldn't have to give Krennic the time of day. So the fact that he does give that Tarkin does give Krennic so much attention, I feel like means that there is something to this rivalry. This is one I've always found amusing. Here we get into Krennic needing more resources. Now this brings up an interesting time period in Star Wars publishing in general. It connects even to the Thrawn novel, which came out in the next year. This novel came out in 2016, and Thrawn, I believe, was 2017, along with a new season of Rebels. But it was a time when there was a lot of talk in Star Wars books about the materials that made the Death Star. And it was kind of an interesting time to read if you're reading the books as they came out, because we know what's going on and people in the book don't. So you're reading about people looking for, I think it's literally called doomium, but one of the metals used to make the Death Star. And we know why people are looking for this and why the Empire is taking up all these resources, and why the Empire is going to these worlds and stripping them bare. But the people in the galaxy don't. The people in the galaxy can't comprehend what the Death Star is going to be. So it's just, that's not necessarily relevant to the book itself, but it was something that I kind of enjoyed. And you can still enjoy, obviously, as you read these novels. That didn't change, but it was a kind of a cool bit of dramatic irony that you got as a fan, where the books weren't necessarily, obviously, Catalyst is about the Death Star, so we know what's going on, but the other books, the characters don't necessarily know what the Death Star is, but we do. And it's kind of like, reading anything else where Anakin is going to become Darth Vader, and watching the Clone Wars and seeing things foreshadowed. The prequel stuff of Star Wars always does a really good job of letting the fans take advantage of having that dramatic irony instead of playing it off like we don't know where the story is going to go. But within the story, Krennic is just talking about needing worlds to supply these materials, and they need to be kind of off the beaten path where people aren't going to really notice if the planets go and get stripped bare. Then we head over to Haz. Haz Obit is over at a bar, and things are getting harder for smugglers without the war because there's less of a need to move things about, and the Empire is a little bit more wanting to crack down on these things, especially because it's trying to stunt any kind of potential rebellion. Haz talks about how he was actually protected by the Republic. He couldn't work for the Separatists anymore after getting some of their scientists killed, but he did get protected by the Republic, that Krennic bailed him out, got him new ships, that sort of thing. But he's always been kind of worried about Krennic being his old friend over his shoulder. One thing that gets talked about, too, is that even, the bar fight on this planet gets stopped by the Empire. That usually no one would care about a bar fight. Bar fight's just a bunch of good, ornery fun. And now the Empire's like, nope, you're not even going to do that. You can't, even get into a scuffle. That's a signal for how much things have changed. In the middle of this thought process, an old friend of Matisse shows up. Matisse was one of the commando types that worked for Krennic when they stole the scientists, and he claims that his connections to Krennic are gone, and he offers up an offer that's a little bit too good to be true, probably, to Haas about just basically smuggling contraband from the Separatists that didn't get melted down. Haas really needs some credits, he really needs things to do, and so he's thinking about taking up this offer. And so in this pursuit of peace, we see, like, yeah, it seems more peaceful, right? Like, there's less bar fights, there's less smuggling, that sort of thing, but it's a peace that's coming with a strong arm. That's coming with an overbearance to a degree, and it's something that seems better, right? It seems better if there's not bar fights. What else could that mean, and where else is the Empire getting into its business? It's like, if there's a bar fight at your local place, the local police might show up, but the FBI isn't gonna show up, to use an American agency, right? Like, federal oversight people don't show up for a bar fight. That's really what stormtroopers are. Stormtroopers aren't just police, they are galactic police. So the idea that galactic police care about one little bar fight as opposed to local authorities, that's really the difference. It's not it's not authorities caring about a fight, it's why does the Empire care about this rundown bar in the middle of nowhere. Then we get into chapter 15, On the Shoulders of Giants. There's a couple of really interesting things I want to talk about in this chapter. This kind of sunken zoo refuge that was moved. I have a lot of thoughts about this because the way it's presented in the story is there's this refuge for this group of people whose homeworld was destroyed and they needed a place to live. So way back in the day, before Coruscant was like all entirely a city, they had this little refuge that was theirs that they didn't build up into a mega city. And then the mega city grew around them, and it ended up being so high above them. And it talked about how, the people there really didn't mind that Coruscant looked down on them. They were just happy to be there. And then talk about what it's a terrible thing because they basically get uprooted and sent to this dying world to make way for an Imperial research base. And I think there's multiple things going on here, because on the one hand, it's exactly what the book says it is. The Empire is breaking old promises from the Republic, kicking these people out of their homes and making them move. And that is obviously a bad thing. And it shows how the Empire doesn't care about old treaties, doesn't care about old promises, doesn't care about people, and is willing to just uproot and move people elsewhere. But I feel like this is also kind of an example of some of what was wrong with the Republic. Because just the way it's written, like there's a line that's literally like, it was considered a sunken zoo. The people there didn't mind that they were being looked down on, or one person was mad because they used to jog through the park. Like, if it's their sovereign land, if it's kind of like their embassy, their place, why were people of Coruscant jogging through it like it was Central Park? So there's a part of me that wonders, like, did these people even like this refuge? Or were they there because they had nowhere else to go? And, like, how much maybe did they resent the Republic? If it felt like this very, like, faux, we're going to help you and we're going to do this thing because it makes us feel good kind of thing that the Republic was doing a lot of. That was why the Separatists rose up in general. Even though they were under the leadership of a Sith Lord, most of the Separatists themselves weren't bad people. They were in rebellion against an entity that wasn't taking care of them. And so I don't say that to say that the Empire did them a favor by taking them to a new planet, because the Empire certainly didn't do them any favors. The Empire certainly didn't care about them, and it sent them to a dying world that they may not even like either. It will put them way out in the middle of nowhere, and they'll probably not get any resources or help now. So they're definitely in a worse place. But I also kind of wonder about the place they were in to begin with. It's kind of that gilded morality that the Republic had that I think isn't expressly said in the book, but it's something to think about. After this description, we have Galen getting the Kyber crystals, and it's kind of interesting because he talks about how he can't sleep because of the Kybers. And I've never heard the Jedi having this issue, and so I wonder if that's part of why the Jedi like to hang on to the Kybers, like maybe because of the Force, because they could have that connection with the living crystals. they were never negatively affected by them in a way that maybe it would have the general populace, and that could kind of go into part of why the general populace didn't have them. A reference I appreciated was the Jedi took it from someone selling it in the Outer Rim. It seems like it's a reference to a cut arc on Otapau from Star Wars The Clone Wars, where Anakin and Obi-Wan were sent to Otapau to investigate a Jedi's murder, and it ended up being that they found a giant kyber crystal that was being sold to the Separatists. And it was one of those arcs from Clone Wars when it was cancelled that didn't make it back into the final season. And of course we see a giant kyber in a Rebels episode, the Rebels episodes with Saw Gerrera as well. So it's kind of some connections to some stuff that had already happened, and I don't think the Saw episodes the Saw episodes wouldn't have been out yet because Rogue One wasn't out, which means we didn't know Saw from the films yet, only from previous episodes of the Clone Wars. So it was something that was referencing something that was done in Clone Wars that never got to happen, while laying groundwork for something that was coming in Rebels soon. So it's just kind of a cool little couple of sentences there that talk about that. We go back to Haas. Haas is now on one of these missions that feels too good to be true. It's starting to feel like a special ops mission, which makes him worried that Krennic is actually involved. And ultimately he gets brought in by an Imperial official who, instead of arresting him, helps him and says the phrase, "get with the program," which is of course exactly what Krennic told him. So he's feeling Krennic's fingerprints all over this. Ultimately he's getting paid a lot. What I found interesting with Haas is he was getting frustrated because the Imperial official was not telling him anything, but then he goes to his crew and he doesn't tell his crew anything, so it was kind of like a stuff rolls downhill sort of situation there, but ultimately everyone's getting paid, so they're happy. We jump back to Galen, who's now with Lyra, and Jen is like hoverboarding all around the lab. Galen is going off on this critique of the Jedi and of the Republic, and basically this idea that the Jedi kept the Kybers for themselves, and it's making Lyra nervous. It's making Lyra nervous because it sounds like something Krennic would say. Lyra obviously cares about the Jedi a lot, and so hearing that is something that troubles her. And what I thought interesting too is there was a lot of critiques of the Jedi Order and what the Jedi Order did in the galaxy that are very common critiques that I hear all the time, and they're not untrue, but they're being said by Galen Galen by way of Krennic. So the fact that they're coming from Krennic means they're coming from the villains. So what does it mean to a story when there's these valid critiques of the heroes, but they're coming from the bad guys? And Krennic is certainly not looked at as a redeemable figure in the Star Wars universe, and so it feels a bit more like a truth that's being used to manipulate and lie, if that makes sense. But what I find interesting about it is it brings up this discussion. I think this is a much larger discussion, a discussion too large for this video, of the Jedi and Kybers and lightsaber technology and energy technology in general. You know, the Jedi did keep the Kybers sacred. And it's easy to look at the Jedi from this kind of warrior monk perspective, to be like, well, of course they had the Kybers because they have this spiritual connection to them. But for the average citizen of the Republic who doesn't have that connection with the Force and doesn't understand it, it can also be seen as these Jedi keeping secrets, that the Jedi keep knowledge of the Force to themselves, and the Jedi see that as protection. Surely if Kybers can be harnessed to be made into the Death Star, then maybe the Jedi were right to keep that information a secret. Or were they? Like, who gave them the authority to decide what people can and can't know? And that's something that's kind of getting brought up here, but it's again being brought up by people we shouldn't trust. Not the Ursos, but rather Galen, because he's been fed that by untrustworthy types. And so that's just something I'm going to think about more as I'm sure that theme is going to come up more as we read. I don't think it's something that jumped out to me on my past readings of this novel, but it's something I'm going to kind of look for as I continue on with this reading. But ultimately, Lyra is worried about Galen. He looks ragged, he's not sleeping well, he's kind of in this prison, a gilded cage, obsessed. She talks about how he still seems like he's in jail. Like, only this time instead of an actual cell, it's this prison of his own making because he's become obsessed with these Kybers that are playing with his mind. But what's worse than that is we learn that Krennic is watching them, and he finds out that Lyra is as troublesome as ever. And that's going to create some family conflict for our Urso family. Now, for what all of this stuff in this chapter has to do with on the shoulder of giants, I'm not exactly sure, other than it's a lot on just almost this idea of legacy, right? So it's this lab being built on top of the legacy of this refuge that got moved. These Kybers that were the legacy of the Jedi Order. So it's these kind of grand ideas that used to be, and now the people who are reaping, maybe unfairly, the benefits of all of that happened. But that's all I have to say about this week's chapters. For next week, let's read chapters 16 and 17. And we'll get into that. So that's chapter 16, Unexpected Value, and 17, Material Implications. Please let me know in the comments what you have to say about the reading today. I would love to hear from you guys. If you're not already, please follow us on the socials, and I will talk to you guys next week.